attitude of Julio Claudian Emperors towards state religion and the emerging imperial cult. Well, we're going to have a quick look at the attitude of each emperor towards the official and traditional Roman state religion, a little brief mention towards foreign cults and foreign religions, but also a little bit of a discussion about the imperial cult. As ever, we're going to try and skip through this, so there will be the occasional source and reference that you could make that I've not made a reference to, but obviously this is a revision clip. So if we're looking at our Julio Claudian emperors, well, we can sort of see a difference of attitude between each of our emperors towards either traditional Roman state religion, the emerging imperial cult, or, of course, those foreign cults and foreign religions. So for Augustus, it's kind of like a little bit of a mixture between traditional and innovative. So he's really going to reinforce and reiterate traditional Roman state religion, but he's also going to do something totally different. So he's going to be quite innovative as well. Tiberius, could we say, is a little bit conservative, maybe a little bit reluctant. Certainly the imperial cult. We're going to see some evidence of that. Gaius, obviously, we know about his push and his promotion of his own divinity. So we sort of say he's extreme and opportunistic, and is his attitude a result of the challenges that he faces from the Senate and from other areas of Roman society? Claudius may be traditional and maybe quite restrained, as we'll see from the letter to the Alexandrians. And Nero, even though he is really focused on promotion of his own self through emulating heroes, is he kind of a little bit uninterested in state religion and maybe even the imperial cult? So we'll have a little discussion of that. What would an essay structure sort of look like? Well, the question could focus on the promotion of the imperial cult, or it could look at traditional Roman religion. You could really focus it around this balance between tradition and innovation, stability or instability. Of course, you can absolutely answer any question in terms of a thematic response, and in many ways that's sometimes a little bit better if you really know your stuff. But because this is a revision clip, we're going to focus it chronologically, emperor by emperor. So we're going to look at Augustus's powers and his aims, the imperial cult, a little bit of a discussion about his reforms and on what poets like Ovid say about that. Tiberius will look at his attitude towards the imperial cult and the really crucial piece of evidence, which is called the Gaius decree. Gaius and the promotion of his own divinity. Claudius and his attitude towards the imperial cult and his own divinity, as evidenced in his letter to the Alexandrians, and also Nero and the gods and really emulating heroes. So what powers did Augustus have? If we have a little look at Augustus, what allowed Augustus to interfere in state religion? Well, there's a few things that you could mention along this line. First of all, obviously, after the second settlement and his sort of the Senate giving him censor powers along with those tribunician powers, even though, of course, he's not a tribune, censor powers have some type of moral authority and structure to do with them. There's equally his statement in verse 34 of Res Gestae, when he talks about his auctoritas, his personal and moral authority. And of course, there's the fact that Augustus actually holds offices. So, for instance, he's Pontifex Maximus from 12 BC onwards after Lepidus dies. And he also holds other priesthoods as well. So a lot of this added to Augustus's other powers, such as Maius Imperium, and the fact that he can hold that within the Pomerium as well, kind of really does mean that Augustus can have a pretty much unprecedented influence upon Roman state religion. So what are his aims of his religious policy? Well, first of all, it's certainly to restore Rome's dignity. Many Romans at that point thought that the chaos of the Republic had been driven because of luxury, decadence, depravity, etc. So really to sort of restore Rome's dignity and its traditional worship of its gods, because they'd been kind of neglected. Restore those religious traditions and deal with new cults from the east, in particular the cult of Isis from Egypt does seem to get a little bit of a kick in. So does pretty much most emperors' attitudes towards druids as well. Revive all republican values, patriotism, loyalty to the state, family, and finally, and this is the innovative attitude, because so far this is all quite traditional. The innovative aim of Augustus's religious policy was the promotion of the Julians, as evidenced in some of the really famous visual representations of Augustan religion, such as the Areopagus and the Prima Porta statue of Augustus. Let's start this off with a little bit of evidence in terms of our Augustus discussion, and let's have a little look at a bit of numismatic evidence, which is this denarii of Augustus in 16 BC, and it's really, really important for a range of reasons. First of all, we've got Venus over here, but then importantly on the right-hand side, we've got the symbols of the four priesthoods that Augustus held. So importantly, Augustus actually held all four of the major priesthoods. And that's the first time that anyone had done that. So this was really emphasizing his respect for state religion. But Venus, remember, is the divine ancestor of the Julii clan, because it's her son Aeneas that the Julians claim descent from. So the fact that Venus is here and is pretty much featured on a big chunk of Augustan material is definitely that, emphasizing that link towards the divine. That goes one further in Augustus's Res Gestae. Now, obviously, Res Gestae, you've got to be careful in regard to the provenance of the source and the aim of Res Gestae and how Augustus would want to be promoting himself in Res Gestae. But certainly, again, he's really focusing on that traditional aspect of religion, restoring 82 temples. Again, a link. The fact that he's a member of each religious college, which links to the previous coin, the Pontifex Maximus discussion, when he says the death of the man, he can't bring himself to name Lepidus, death of the man in 12 BC, he's Pontifex Maximus, and then the building of new temples to Jupiter, Apollo, Divine Julius, that's an innovative aspect, certainly. Mars the Avenger, which is in the Augustan Forum, and again, links to Caesar as deified. Suetonius pretty much backs up again or corroborates a chunk of Res Gestae material, and certainly Suetonius here doesn't really have any particular agenda to discredit Augustus here. He's kind of just relaying information. Do be aware, of course, Suetonius is writing much later under the reign of Hadrian, where I guess it's a little bit more normalized, this link towards the divine. We've got, again, the link to Pontifex Maximus, the keeping of those of the Sibylline book and burn 2,000 other unsuitable books. It's in verse 31 that you get the discussion that Augustus renames the month of Sextilius to August. Again, Suetonius confirms that Augustus holds those priesthoods and they're increased in number and dignity, and also that he revives previously forgotten or old rites and festivals, such as the Flamen of Jupiter, Lupercalia, which is again is further promoted, the secular games which mark the foundation of Rome, and Compitalia with the Lares, those guardian spirits, to be crowned twice a year. Now, on that focus with Compitalia, this is the real innovative aspect of Augustan attitudes towards religion, because there's a real link here between these guardian spirits and Augustus and his almost supervision of the state and of the city. Now, the important thing about Compitalia was it was a festival commemorating these guardian spirits. And the fact that this was then associated with Augustus was actually a really powerful way to reinforce and reiterate Augustus's supervision as being beneficial for the people of Rome. In very many ways, you can see this whole festival of Compitalia as being almost a street level aspect to this emerging imperial cult. So, what do other writers say? Well, other writers also discuss what Augustus's attitude was like towards religion and towards the emerging imperial cult. We've obviously got Fortune, Peace, and Mercury being worshipped, and Augustus was associated with the worship of those gods. In Suetonius, we have a discussion of alien cults being suppressed, such as Isis and Serapis and Druidism, and unofficial cults sort of growing up in Italy to worship Augustus, and obviously the worship of Augustus in the provinces. So other writers, Virgil, in the Aeneid, there's a big link towards Aeneas and the Julians and the divine. Ovid, there's some really great material about the divine future for Augustus, but also the guardian spirit, and also Livia as being beneficial for Rome. Where we get a little bit of criticism is Tacitus, where Augustus superseded worship of the gods. And also in 437, the deified Augustus did not prevent the building of a temple at Pergamum to himself and to Rome. And then finally, we've got the geographer Strabo, who again pretty much writes without any real political agenda, discussing the dedication of the temple of Apollo at Actium, but also the cult of Augustus that had been started in Gaul. So there's a real sort of balance here between Augustus very much promoting traditional religion and reinforcing and reiterating that, but also carefully cultivating this emerging imperial cult, trying to strike a balance sort of between promoting himself and his family, but also keeping that whole atmosphere and attitude of primus inter pares pretty much ticking over. Tiberius, let's have a look at Tiberius. Now, Tiberius, again, I think a little bit more conservative, a little bit more reluctant, and the best example of this would be his response to when Philanius and Equites was accused of blasphemy for selling a statue of Augustus. What actually happened to Philanius? Well, actually, nothing happened to Philanius. We're told that the reason why Tiberius says nothing happens is that Augustus had not been voted divine honors in order to ruin Roman citizens. So it's a great example of Tiberius's attitude towards the imperial cult. We've got a coin issued by Tiberius, which is pretty much linking and showing his relationship to the divine Augustus, who's obviously been deified at this point. So you got a statue of Augustus there. And obviously this is used by decree of the Senate. And it's pretty much linking Tiberius to Augustus. Importantly, Tiberius was never deified and also refused for Livia, his mum, but also Augustus's wife, to similarly be deified. She is later on by Claudius, and he refused to be worshipped as a god. However, Tiberius maintains the imperial cult and does uphold the divinity of Augustus, which is going to be later on useful for Gaius and to Claudius. He does dedicate a temple to Augustus at Nola. So on balance, is Tiberius's religious policy, is it beneficial? Does it strengthen the imperial cult? Is it good for the empire? Well, Tiberius, it's certainly, according to Tacitus, repairs temples. Suetonius says he vetoes all bills for his temples and priests to his divinity, but does encourage the worship of Augustus and the traditional gods. And equally, supposedly according to Suetonius and Tacitus, in his later life, he's much more bothered about astrology and is incredibly superstitious, bans foreign cults, banishes Jews from Rome, and very similarly to other emperors as well, moves against Isis, and there's a clamp down on Druidism, according to Tacitus. One of the best examples of Tiberius's attitude towards imperial cult is the Githyon decree, which is Githyon is in the Peloponnese in Laconia, and there was a link, without going into loads of detail, between the city and Tiberius from his early life. Basically, the authorities had asked for permission from Tiberius to make certain offerings for him. And Tiberius had written back, this had been preserved, basically sort of saying thanks, but no thanks. And it's the bottom paragraph. I commend you for this and accept that it's fitting for all men in general and for your city in particular to reserve special honours befitting the gods in keeping with greatness of the services of my father to the whole world. But I am myself more satisfied with more moderate honours suitable for men. So it's basically Tiberius not really wanting to offend people in Rome and really refusing Githion's request. What about Gaius? So Gaius really does promote his own divinity. You could say he's a bit of a contrast to Augustus and Tiberius because he really does promote this. And could we say that he is really doing this as a response to his problems with the Senate and with elites in Rome? Now, even though Suetonius tells us that Gaius has a positive start to his reign, he very much has a bit of an inferiority complex. Augustus had become princeps after the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra as a well-established figure and with pretty much complete control over the Roman world. Tiberius had become emperor in his 50s and had been an incredibly successful general, had political experience, etc. Gaius had none of these things. So is his push and is his promotion of his own divinity a response to those issues? He's unable to match senators in a political experience and as a result uses this to assert his superior status. So that's why we've got the remodeling of the palace to incorporate temples to his divine spirit. He appears as a god. Do remember, of course, that Augustus had actually done that. Suetonius mentions him dressing up as Apollo at one point. The sexual promiscuity, or certainly the circulation of those stories as a way of rivaling the Olympians in Greek mythology. And then, of course, remember that he also claims that Jupiter was also the father of his daughter as well. So we've got a much more extreme attitude towards promotion of his own divinity. And that's corroborated. So all this from Suetonius is corroborated by Josephus and by Dio. Josephus saying that Gaius aimed at being declared a living god. Dio telling us about temples being set up in Rome, granted by the Senate. Claudius, for my money, is very similar to Tiberius. And there's a really, really, really crucial piece of evidence that we get about Claudius's attitude towards divinity, or certainly towards his own divinity and the imperial cult, and that's the letter to the Alexandrians. Now, basically, the letter had been sent to Claudius as a result of a dispute between the Greek and the Jewish communities of Alexandria, and basically they'd petitioned Claudius as a god, but he's not really interested as well. And you see that similarly to Tiberius in Claudius's reply. And basically, it's the bold bit here, but I decline the appointment of high priest to me and the building of temples for myself, for I do not wish to be offensive to my contemporaries. So you get a very similar attitude towards Tiberius in Claudius's attitude towards his own deification. Suetonius also tells us that Claudius does sort of promote traditional religion, though, and again has an attitude quite similar to Augustus and Tiberius in different aspects. So in particular, though, the crucial thing to be aware of for Claudius is the promotion of Livia and Antonia, his two grandmothers, in terms of their deification. Nero is, again, a contrast to Claudius. And you can see this from two coins. So the first coin is very similar to Augustus because it's telling you about Nero and his holding of those four priesthoods. And the idea that, again, Nero is promoting traditional religion by holding all four of these priesthoods. So it's really similar to the Augustan coin that we saw at the start. The second coin is, again, a little bit different, but it's really promoting Nero maybe as Apollo here, and sort of Apollo, the lyre player, and certainly is sort of very similar to how Suetonius portrays Nero as trying to emulate the gods and emulate the heroes, and in particular, his love of music and performance. Suetonius 53 does give us some discussion about how Nero attempted to emulate certain gods and heroes. So we've got Apollo. He tries to outdo Helios as a chariot racer and wants to outdo Heracles as a lion killer. So there is certainly an interest from Suetonius about Nero and his attempt to emulate different gods and heroes. Suetonius 53, his greatest weaknesses were his thirst for popularity and his jealousy of other men. He had a craving for immortal fame, but then crucially, is kind of a little bit uninterested, despised all religious cults except the statuette of a girl, and even this he ends up sort of chucking away and weeing on. So there's really maybe a sort of a lack of coverage of Nero and his attitude and his promotion of traditional religion and even the imperial cult. If discussing Nero and religion, always mention about the persecution of the Christians, mentioned in Tacitus and Suetonius. And again, is this anything different than maybe what previous Julio Claudians would have done if they actually genuinely suspected a group of being behind the burning of the city? Of course, you've got to question, though, whether that is actually true or not. Remember, Suetonius thinks Nero is 100% behind it. Tacitus is a little bit more skeptical. And of course, also link Nero's reign with the emerging Jewish revolt and the fact that the Jewish revolt had been a trigger as a result, well, it's been triggered rather, from Nero raising taxes and attempting to extract money from the temple. So really, Nero's attitude towards religion is certainly a little bit mixed. He's certainly trying to promote his religion for his own interests, but it's certainly a little bit more mixed. So on the whole, we can think that Augustus is a mixture between tradition and innovation. Tiberius, a little bit conservative and reluctant, perhaps. Gaius really pushing his own divinity as a reaction to his probable problems with the Senate and the elites. Claudius, a little bit more traditional and restrained. Is Claudius quite similar towards Tiberius? And Nero, certainly focusing on the heroic aspect of religion, but perhaps neglecting traditional Roman religion.